Thank you, Michelle. Okay, welcome to the 2nd District Officer Training for the Parliamentarian Breakout Room. I am going to share my screen so that you all can see the agenda here. And you will get a copy of this agenda and a copy to the direct links for all of the items that are linked in this agenda. So to jump right in, there are 3 main parts to being a parliamentarian on your PTA board. The first is really about meeting management and parliamentary procedure. So parliamentarian is really an assistant to the president and acts as a consultant. And that's one reason that a parliamentarian is actually an appointed role and not an elected role, because it should be that the parliamentarian and the president have a pretty close working relationship and can work well together. So that's one reason that parliamentarian is appointed. And it's important for a parliamentarian to be able to attend all of the meetings, both board and association meetings. And what do you do if you don't have a parliamentarian? You can appoint someone to be the parliamentarian during that meeting, or if your parliamentarian is absent, you could appoint someone to act in that role. So the second major part of being a parliamentarian is chairing the Bylaws Committee. And that's just a one-time thing per year. So you would pull together maybe 1 or 2 other people that could read through your bylaws, and that's done annually. You want to review bylaws annually for any changes that you might want to make, but you don't need to actually update your bylaws to the most current version, except for every 5 years. And it used to be every 3 years, and they've made it a little easier on us that we don't need to update our bylaws except for every 5 years. If 5 years seems like a lot of time to me, because it's nice to have if you don't have a lot of changes, but there are some really beneficial changes that CAPTA, California PTA, will offer. For example, recently they have just added the ability for both association meetings and board meetings to have Zoom conferences or teleconference meetings. So that's an automatic part of the updated version of bylaws. So it's a good idea if you haven't updated recently to just, even if you're not making any specific changes, just update to the current version. And we'll talk more about how to do that in a bit. The third part of being a unit parliamentarian is calling the nominating committee to order. And again, that's something that usually happens in the spring, and it's just a one-time thing. The nominating committee is the group of PTA members that help to find and recruit board members for the following school year. And we'll talk more about the nominating committee in just a minute. So to focus in a little bit on one of the main parts of being a parliamentarian, which is to help run a smooth meeting. A lot of that has to do with helping people to make motions, to actually call for votes. So a good idea when you start off your year with your PTA board is to review some parliamentary procedure and how to make motions. And you can do that same thing with at the start of the year with your members in your association meetings. So they always say there's 8 steps to a motion. I'm going to open up this document here. That just makes it sound a little bit more complicated, but technically there are 8 steps to a motion. But I always use the example of chocolate ice cream. I don't know why. I guess I like chocolate ice cream, especially at Swenson's here in San Francisco. But so to make a motion, you first want to be able to be recognized by the chair. So once you have the floor, they call it, or the ability, it's your turn to speak, you'd say, I make a motion to always serve chocolate ice cream at an association meeting. So now there's a motion on the floor, and really nothing else should happen until a second to that motion happens. So someone else says, I second that motion. That simply means that there's more than one person in the room that wants to talk about having chocolate ice cream at an association meeting. So you've got a motion on the floor and you've got a second, at least 2 people in the room want to talk about it. I think people at this point often feel rushed, like they have to go to a vote right now because the motion is on the floor. Really, a motion on the floor and being seconded means that now it's time to have debate or discussion about that motion that's on the floor. So now is the time to keep all discussion about that topic. So you can see how a motion really helps meeting management, because you can say, oh, that's kind of off topic. We have a motion on the floor. We need to keep talking about chocolate ice cream at association meetings. After some of that discussion feels like it's been played out, the chair of the meeting might say, is there any more discussion? And if there's not, we're going to call for the vote. And then you ask all in favor, say aye. And you always also need to say, is anyone opposed? So ask who's in favor and who's opposed. And then if it's the majority is usually what's required to pass that vote, then the majority would, you would repeat it. So it is majority decision that we will have chocolate ice cream at the association meeting. So that's kind of a longer way of talking about motions. There, you can also do something that's called a consent motion, which is just a quick way to move through something that's very standard, like say approving the minutes. A lot of units will have people that's kind of their role is to review the minutes. So you don't have to have everyone reading every word at the association meeting. At each meeting, you do approve the minutes from the previous meeting. So a quick way to do that is here, I'm presenting the minutes, and if there's no one opposed, and you just kind of pause for a moment, then the minutes will stand as approved. That's just that's okay to do a quick consent motion in that way. I also have a link here for motions chart, which has a bunch of I won't go into depth about at this training here, but there are like different types of motions and votes that can be made, and some don't require a second. So for example, if is verify a voice vote, that means if someone wants to do a roll call vote and says, I don't know if that was, the ayes had it or the noes had it, I want to really count each person, that doesn't require a second. But if someone wants to do that, you need to do that. So this is a motions chart.
I have a quick question, Melissa.
Yep.
When taking a vote, not obvious, but you vote for people that are in favor, and then you ask if there are any no votes. And then I know that it's happened where are there any abstentions? And if there are any abstentions, do the meeting notes have to reflect that there just was an abstention, or do they have to name like, oh, Melissa Mountain abstains from voting?
I don't believe that needs to be written in the minutes. When I was just recently in the California PTA convention, which goes even more in depth into parliamentary procedure, I heard them say that you do not need to ask for abstentions. And so I need to study up a little bit more about that to feel really confident in answering that question. But you do not, apparently, from this, very professional, there's professional parliamentarians, asking for abstentions is not part of, you do not have to record that.
Okay.
Or even ask for it, but I'm going to study up more on that one. Thank you for asking that. Okay. So that was a lot about motions. Know your quorums. So quorums are the minimum number of people in the room that you need in order to not have a meeting, but to conduct any business at the meeting. So if your board got together and you had a quorum of 5, but only 4 people were present, you could still meet and discuss things, but you couldn't take official votes because you do need to have a quorum. And the quorum for both your board meeting and your association meeting that's part of what's identified in your bylaws. And I mentioned that's a good idea to just give your board and your membership a little mini training on parliamentary procedure. And parliamentary procedure can feel just really formal. You don't have to employ it all the time. It can be casual meetings, but it's there when you need it to help. Maybe at a more contentious meeting, parliamentarian can help the chair, which is usually the president, to, if multiple people want to speak, they can take a list of the names in the order of who wants to speak. You can set a time limit for how long people want to speak. So parliamentarian can help run a smooth meeting with the president. Okay, so that second big part, and where I usually find people have the most questions and feel most mystery about, is updating the bylaws. So we talked a little bit about this when we did the walk through the bylaws, but the bylaws themselves are the big framework. It's the big picture. It's the governing structure. It says, which month your election meeting needs to be. But in the standing rules, which is the last 2 pages of your bylaws, which are a little more flexible, it might have what day of the week you meet and exactly how often you meet. In fact, a lot of the things that used to be in the standard bylaws now have been pushed to those last 2 pages, the standing rules, which is great because they're more flexible. These standing rules are something that you can change from meeting to meeting as necessary, as you need. I mentioned that the bylaws need to be reviewed annually, but they don't have to be updated except for every 5 years. So what is the process for doing that? You would call together a committee meeting to review the bylaws. Oh, I've got someone coming to my door. Sorry. Hopefully my son is going to get the door. Okay, I think he's got it. Okay, so where are we? Now I'm totally distracted. Okay, bylaws, we're changing the bylaws. We've got a committee going. They will review for any changes. You don't necessarily have to have a change. Then you say, okay, the bylaws committee has determined no changes are needed for that year of the bylaws. If there are changes, you would get those approved by your PTA board and you would submit them to the district parliamentarian. It's the district parliamentarian that will then take it from there and submit them for approval by the California PTA parliamentarian. Once the district parliamentarian gets those back from California PTA approved, you will then bring those updated or amended bylaws to your membership, and it's the membership that finally votes to adopt them. And so any of those changes that you were proposing aren't actually official until the membership has adopted them. Are there any questions about the bylaw, those sort of steps there? And anyone can just.
Melissa, it's
Yeah.
Rachel. So my question I was thinking about is, like, when you mentioned about the changes with meetings being on Zoom, is that something that's already been accepted by, is it the second district?
California PTA California PTA has actually extended the deadline for people to have teleconferencing for both board meetings and association meetings through the end of this calendar year, through December 31st. So if you don't get your bylaws updated to that new version until the end of this year, you're still good to go. Like you can have Zoom meetings, for example.
Okay, because I wasn't sure is that something where we would then amend our bylaws and then go through all that process that you had just mentioned about sending it to the district and having it approved before we can, or is that totally different? Since we're
can you ask it your question again?
because like how we've been so it's through the California PTA that change with the having Zoom meetings. So is that, do we as a unit have to do anything?
Yeah, no, you can go, you don't need to do anything in order to, it's allowable to have Zoom meetings right now, but if they don't extend that just kind of across the board into 2022, then it would technically require a bylaws update until then. So I suggest if you don't have that part in your bylaws, go ahead and try to get that done in the fall of the school year so that it becomes a permanent part of your bylaws.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. I can't get that highlighting off of the agenda, but it'll still work here. Okay.
Nikki was asking how long the process takes.
Thank you, because I can't see the chat at all. So thank you for bringing anything in the chat to the attention. It used to take up to at least 4 weeks, if not more sometimes, because everything used to be required to be done through the mail. But since the pandemic, everything has moved to email. So it's actually a lot quicker. It could be as quick as a week or 2. I've been finding recently. So that's also really nice that you can submit the bylaws updates and we can get them back from the CAPTA parliamentarian in about 2 weeks' time.
So if we have changes that we want implemented for the next school year? Should we be doing that now as opposed to the start of the next school year?
If you still have a board meeting, you could get that part done now and I could submit them to California PTA, but you probably wouldn't get them officially adopted until that first meeting in the fall, just because it's the end of the school year. But you can start that process at any time.
So I'm happy to chat with you about this offline if it's not relevant to other people, but we have some questions about our officers and wanting to change our officer designations just based on how things played out at the end of this year. And so we're trying to figure out the best way to do that and make it, quite honestly, just in line with appropriate with the bylaws, with the California bylaws. And so, you know, it sounds like some of that might be able to be done through the standing orders, but you know, I'm happy to chat with you offline about this if it would be better.
That's the perfect thing to email me about. That's the common questions that I get as the district parliamentarian. So you can just email parliamentarian@sfpta.org, and I'm happy to go through that with you. We can set up a time to call or video or just do it over email, depending how detailed your questions are. But that's what I do with people all the time. I can help advise you through the update process of your bylaws.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about this in the earlier training when we were doing a walk through the bylaws, but it's a good idea to create a summary of those key points, kind of a Cliff Notes version of your bylaws so that people can just scan through the key points easily. And then e-bylaws, I want to talk a little bit about this because people get confused thinking that it's a storage place for bylaws and that we can just go and find what your most current version is. The e-bylaws is more of a way to help you draft them. So it's not something that stores them or archives them, but e-bylaws is it's an easy way where you just go in, you fill in basically the questions, the blanks, and then the e-bylaws system spits out the most current version of bylaws based on all those things that you answered, how much your dues are, which officers you have, when you want to have meetings. So the e-bylaws helps you to create that. Some people say, but e-bylaws doesn't allow me to, you know, we don't want to have a historian and so I can't cross it out. That's okay. I would still recommend using the e-bylaws and just coming to your district parliamentarian, asking them, can you help me edit the bylaws? There are certain things that we can help edit beyond the capabilities of the e-bylaws. But we'll usually set you off starting with the e-bylaws.
Just as a note of comment, I normally am not into bylaws, but I was on the bylaw committee. So Rachel, I was on this bylaw committee, and it really helps because when you look at the paper version or the PDF, it can become very overwhelming with the areas that are scratched out and you're like, oh my God, should I be looking at that? So the e-bylaws basically allow you to, it asks the questions that allow you to change. And so then you can ignore the rest of it. So yes, helpful.
Yeah, it's a good guide. It's an easy start and we can still work with changing any updates that you feel like e-bylaws isn't allowing you to do. Sometimes that's because it's just something that's not allowed, but more often it's something we can just use a PDF editor and edit the bylaws to what works for your unit. Okay. So the third role of the parliamentarian is to call the nominating committee to order. So the parliamentarian is not required to be a member of the nominating committee, but it is their responsibility to make sure that the nominating committee is elected and then it comes together at its first meeting. The parliamentarian would be present, even if they're not a member of the nominating committee, they would come to that first meeting of the nominating committee in order to give them direction and answer any questions and set them off on the right path. There is a ton of information about elections and nominating committees on capta.org. And so I have linked some of that information here. Some of it is more wordy. I love this checklist version that just makes it easier to go down the list of what's required for a nominating committee. And then if you want to get really in depth, I've got this link here to the toolkit, which is helpful for any PTA officer. It has a lot more than just what's responsible for parliamentarians, but it goes into a lot of detail about that. So there are tons of resources, but if this is just all too overwhelming and too much information, that's what we're here for at District PTA, is to just, if you have a specific question, don't hesitate to reach out to us to ask about that. We've got even, scripts. CAPTA provides scripts for running the elections, exactly what to say. So they really have a lot of support for that. Let's see if I can put this in the chat. How I like to usually wind up the parliamentarian training is we have a little quiz with a true false, and I'll put that in the chat for you. After I grab it here, and I'll still share that screen. So I'm going to stop sharing screen here and put it in the chat so that you'll all have it right away if you would like. So hopefully that one will lead you there, and I'll go back to share screen. And we'll go through some of this. Now, I find that this sort of this kind of quiz has a lot of trick questions, but it's a good way to know to answer a lot of questions. So we won't go through all of them, but I'll just kind of pick out some of them. Let's see, like number 3, and you can all still see this share screen. It's okay. Good. Okay, so like number 3, bylaws may be amended at any executive board meeting by a unanimous vote. That's, I'm not following chat if you want to put it in chat, but if you can, feel free to unmute yourself. We just talked about that. That's definitely a false. The executive board actually makes few decisions itself. It votes to make recommendations to the membership, and it's always the membership that is making these final decisions. There are very few exceptions to that. Number 4. I feel like this one is always a tricky one. A treasurer's report is adopted by a majority vote. So actually, that's false, because treasurer's reports are not adopted. They are filed for audit. You present the treasurer's report, but you do not have to vote to accept them. You do vote to accept the budget in the beginning of the school year, and you vote to amend the budget, but we don't actually vote to approve the financial reports each time. A member may be, number 4 or number 5, a member may be a candidate for more than one office. That is actually true. You could run for or be up for nomination for more than one office, but you can only actually serve and have one vote on the board. Let's see. Any of them that you see out there that you're wondering? I'm going to scroll down a little bit. PTSA student members are not permitted to hold office, true or false? You can be a PTA or a PTSA, and student members may serve on the board. Sometimes you might want to have a discussion about whether a student is actually, the treasurer. That's kind of a tough role for a student. That's not usually as advised. And a lot of PTSAs will create a specific role for a student to just be the student representative on the PTA board. And we highly encourage that, especially at the middle and high school levels. Are there any questions that are coming up about parliamentary procedure or elections?
Melissa, I have a question.
Yeah.
What if our board doesn't have a parliamentarian? What usually happens then? Would you recommend that they find one, or?
I think it's a great, I would recommend you that continue trying to find one. I think it's a good opening for both, either someone that is very knowledgeable about PTA stuff or not knowledgeable, because it's a good learning position. And so if you don't have one at the end of the school year yet, you might wait for the fall and find someone that's newly interested. Maybe it's a new family that's joined the school or incoming a ninth grade family, for example, and slot them and point them into that role. But while you don't have a parliamentarian, you can always appoint someone, if it's a board meeting, someone on your board to serve in the role of parliamentarian, can help you keep time and manage parliamentary procedure with you. Same
Okay.
thing that you might do if you didn't have a secretary present at the meeting, you could just at the beginning of the meeting appoint the secretary just for that meeting.
Okay, good to know. Thank you, Melissa.
Yeah. Historian, that's another great role. If you don't find someone to fill that through your elections, you might leave it open, that's fine, until the fall. And maybe someone new or hadn't thought about it, or for whatever reason wants to get involved in the fall, they might just slip into that position. It doesn't have a lot of designated tasks and responsibilities in the role of historian. So that's a great role for someone to just join the board and wants to be part of the conversations.
Okay.
Let's see.
Melissa, I think you said you couldn't see the chat.
Yes.
This was not my question, but the
Thank
question is, can married people hold 2 offices as long as they're not 2 check signers? And can you have 2 people who want to share a position?
The 2 people that want to share a position, that comes up a lot. And can you have co-chairs? You can't have co-presidents, but you can have an executive vice president, which essentially acts as the president and that executive vice president work really closely together, and essentially works as co-presidents, but we can't call them co-presidents because someone does need to be the president in the end. Same thing with the VP of communications. You do need to have a VP of communications rather than co-VPs of communications. However, you could appoint a supporting VP of communications. So you elect at the election your VP of communications, that person that really wants to serve as a co-chair, they can be appointed after your elections to be that essentially co-chair, but their role or title would be called, for example, supporting VP of communications. And then the one regarding the, can you be related? Can you serve on the board? You can serve on the board together, but you can't both be responsible for financials.
And actually, this may be a stupid question, but it's similarly or in the same vein. In regards to the student representative that you just mentioned, or having a student on the board, is there any familial requirements that like I couldn't have my kid on the board, or is that okay?
I don't think so. Not to my knowledge. I have never heard about that restriction. So I'm assuming that's okay to have. It could be a parent. You couldn't. The kids, you wouldn't want. You can't have them both be check signers, just like for anyone else. Yeah.
Darn.
So let's see. Let's pick another random question here. Number 21, the principal serves in an advisory capacity at all executive board meetings. The principal is an automatic member of your board. So I think that they're saying, let's see, 21. So they say true. The principal of the school or representative, although not an elected officer, serves as an advisory capacity with full voting privileges. And the same goes on the nominating committee. The principal is actually an automatic advisor on the nominating committee. Also recognize that on your board, along with those elected members and any that you appoint to voted positions, not only does your principal is an automatic board member, but one teacher representative can serve on your board. I've had questions about, can I have 2 teacher representatives? I learned that according to the bylaws, you can only have 1 teacher representative, but that doesn't mean you can't have 2 teachers on your board. You could create or appoint a new position for, say, could be the curriculum specialist. So we had the teacher representative, and the second teacher that wanted to serve in that kind of co-position, work as partners together on the board, had a different name and title, was the curriculum specialist. Let's see. Number 9, if the affirmative vote is overwhelmingly in support of adopting a motion, the chair does not need to call for a negative vote. False. I see some shaking heads, right? You always do need to ask all ayes, anyone in favor, say aye, and anyone opposed, say no. So you always need to give both groups an opportunity to vote. On Zoom, has anyone found it difficult to do voting over Zoom? Just a couple different ways people do it. You can ask for, because it's hard to do all voice vote, you can ask for people to vote into the chat or to unmute and say yes, or just simply to raise your hand and just give them an example. That's a good thing to do at the start of a virtual meeting, is to go over how you can actually vote. For election meetings, if we're still on virtual, or if you're doing a hybrid version come next election season in the spring, you do want to make sure that you have a backup of doing a ballot vote, because anyone at any time can call for a ballot vote. If there's, say, 2 people running for a position for president, someone can call, or you would go to a ballot vote so that it's a private vote. So you have to have that electronic virtual way of doing a ballot vote. If that were to happen in an in-person meeting, you can kind of just more easily scramble and do pieces of paper to write with someone's name or yes, no on it.
Melissa?
Yeah.
I think for the most part, I mean, I shouldn't say this. Usually there are votes that are overwhelming majority, but truthfully, only the people that can vote are actual members. So how frequently or how necessary is it for either the president or the secretary to have an updated list of members in order to have their vote count? Because that's one of the privileges of actually being a member and not just attending the meeting because you're popping in and then want to have a say-so in the decision when you're not actually a member.
That's a very good point. It's an important reason why the secretary or if you have a membership chair need to keep up a current and accurate membership list, so that you do know who, and that you need to have been a member for 30 days in order to vote. And that's so that you can't, have a vote coming up and then everyone sign up 2 days before so that they can, influence the vote. So you have to have been a member for 30 days. Important to keep that list. They do say that if you don't have a list with you and you don't have a way of verifying who's a member or not, then you would just allow everyone in the room to vote. So I've seen that happen as well, and CAPTA does approve that, but you should keep an updated membership list. And you can do a roll call at the beginning of a meeting so that you would know. And you could, if you're doing a virtual and you wanted to have that identified, you could, have member or something after their name.
Nikki has a good question. Nikki, you want to unmute yourself and ask the question?
Sure. My question was, when you're talking about needing a majority vote to pass a motion, does it need to be a majority of all members in the PTA or just a majority of members in attendance at the meeting? Because we oftentimes, quite honestly, don't have a lot of members at our meeting.
Yeah, thank you so much for asking that question, because that has actually been coming up a lot recently. It is a majority vote of those present at the meeting. It's not a majority of all that have signed up for your unit. So you have to have the quorum, which might be 11 members at your association meeting. As long as you have at least 11, as just be a majority, a simple majority, one more than half, for that to be a passed vote. There are some votes that are 2/3 requirement, not just a simple majority, but it's usually a majority vote.
So just a quick follow-up then, when you talk about the quorum, and maybe this is specific to our bylaws, can the quorum, I mean, is there a requirement that there be, quite honestly, more than the board members at a general PTA meeting? Because there are also times when it's only the board members at the PTA meeting. And so is that sufficient for a full quorum for the?
Yeah, the way that it will be identified in your bylaws, and it's always a higher number for your association meeting. I believe the minimum is 11, but it's all according to how many officers you have. And there's a minimum of 5, I believe, for the board meeting, but I would have to double check that. But that's all outlined in the instructions of updating your bylaws. And that's something I can also work with units on pointing out, are you sure if you're a really small unit and that quorum number is just kind of a little big for you, we can say, do you really need a historian? Let's like line out historian, not have a historian for you. And sometimes that will bring down the quorum. So that's something I can work with you specifically on.
Great.
Make recommendations. Any other pressing questions about parliamentarian? I know it can feel overwhelming, but that's why I always refer to capta.org all the time, just to refresh my memory or make sure I'm stating something correctly when people have questions. And it's just a great resource. Usually has all the answers. And when we're not sure about something, there's a whole nother level of people that are super knowledgeable at the state level to ask them questions.
Melissa, I have another question.
Yeah.
You were talking about e-bylaws. So I looked it up. And then the only thing is I'm not the parliamentarian. I'm like the outgoing president, but I want to help our incoming president kind of, just kind of sort through all these things. So is it okay for me to be doing this at this point, even though I'm like the volunteer not the hospitality person at our school?
Sure. Anyone can offer to help out with that. And that's the great thing about a committee structure is people don't need to be on the board to be involved, right? You can create committees and bring in other people, which is also a great way to start to help transfer leadership and build that transfer of leadership, and so that you're training people kind of along the way. So anyone that wants to volunteer, as long as they're a PTA member, they can sign up for the e-bylaws. So that is the first step. You would go to that e-bylaws website and request a login. And then you would have access to that, basically a questionnaire where you fill in the blanks, and it spits out a formatted set of bylaws for you.
Okay.
I have a general comment to make. Sorry, Rachel, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say thank you.
Even though parliamentary procedure seems like it's so structured, it is. The structure is there for a reason. It's your guiding light, so to speak. So from the get-go, conduct your meetings, conduct your PTA business according to parliamentary procedure, because it will protect you. It makes things, especially if there's a conflict, less personal. Because if there's a conflict and you are, as a president or whatever office you serve, or if you're the parliamentarian, you can speak to, well, here are the guidelines and the principles that the PTA has to follow. This is the parliamentary procedure. So now it's not you personally being the bad guy delivering the verdict, it's the procedure that you're following. And so you just don't want to end up picking and choosing, because then if you haven't been following it and all of a sudden you're using it, then it does seem personal to the person who may be presenting the conflict, because all of a sudden they're like, oh, we haven't been following all of that all along and now you're enforcing it. So it's helpful to enforce it from the get-go, because the procedures are there to help you and to protect you as volunteers. So rely on it. And like I said, when the time comes, it's not personal. That's the way we conduct business within a PTA. And it won't steer you wrong.
Thank you for making that really good point, Sharon.
I had a question, this might be for the membership, but I think it relates to parliamentary procedure, because you mentioned talking about voting members. In the past, we've had challenges getting, we were like, okay, we just need to make sure that we have 15 names and that we have the dues. But we have a number of low-income families, and so even asking or collecting dues in order to be an official member of the PTA is honestly not realistic. And so how do you address that in terms of membership and making sure that we're following the parliamentary procedure, but that people are included, and ways to, like, I can cover someone else's dues, and how we're, you know, covering the dues, and that people can be considered members because they want to be part of the PTA.
Sure. Thank you for that question. There's several things that unit PTAs have done in order to help get beyond that, perhaps financial barriers. So when they're recruiting for members and your membership sign up, you want to make it easy for people to join that can't, or, you know, for any reason aren't going to be paying the membership due. And so rather than saying email this, you know, email address or contact us to ask for a scholarship, you can just have them sign up. They have to give them their name and their contact information, and just leave it blank on the payment part. And then they can be added as an official member. That being said, your unit still needs to cover the minimum $475 for that member, that helps with insurance and all the other things that it goes to support the district, state, and national PTA. So, but members can sign up for free, and you can offer that and term it however works for your unit. Some people call it scholarship, or just want to make it known that everyone is welcome regardless of ability to pay the membership dues. What are some other ideas? I'm blanking. Sharon, what else have you seen for?
I've seen, well, so when you are signing up for yourself as a member, you can also just add an extra amount. Like, I'd like this to cover perhaps a teacher or another person. And so sometimes people will just, if your membership was $10, they will throw in 20 or 30 or 40, you know, in order to cover other people. And so you can put that in there. Likewise, sometimes the president, not the president, the principal has a principal's slush fund, and they may be able to also provide funding to cover family members who want to be a part of the PTA, but they don't have the funds to. And so there's just another source. Just don't let somebody not join because of finances. There's always a way to figure that part of it out. And obviously, if it's somebody who wants a freebie but can actually afford it, that's a different discussion. But there are sources, and just to be inclusive, just try and get everybody on board. At I think it was at Galileo, we actually changed the bylaws because originally I think the membership fee was really high. It was like $20. And so even though there were a lot of people who could, we actually reduced it down to $5, you know, because, and there was some, it was an active discussion because people were like, oh, we can use the other, you know, $15 as a donation. I'm like, no. It's like, we want people to donate more than $15 if they can. And if they feel like they're already donating that extra, then they might not give more. And this way, if you set it at $5, it really encourages more people to join the PTSA or PTA. And even if they're not active, they've got skin in the game because they're a member of the PTA, and $5 usually isn't as a formidable amount as $20, let's say. So that was kind of the thinking behind. We want more people to join the PTSA, and then we can ask other people for the actual donation, just so you separate it out, because generally those who can give more will give more. But if they know that only $5 of the $20 is actually going towards the membership fees themselves, then they'll feel like, I've already given you a $15 donation. Why are you asking me for more? So there's psychology behind it.
Yeah, good points. Also, I love encouraging teachers to join, and I never want to put more of a financial burden on our teachers. So offering them a free membership, or just offering them, if you want to just join for no membership dues, that's great. And some teachers will pay for the membership due, but allowing them to join just for not paying, and then you would just owe that $475. That's another great way to get more of the T and PTA involved. We're just coming up to about 1 o'clock. I know it's been a long morning. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining this whole long morning on a Saturday at the end of a school year. I know we're all so tired. It's been a challenging year. And I'm really glad to see all of you, so many new people in attendance, and I'm really looking forward to getting to know each of your individual units more next year. And just know that if it's feeling a little overwhelming right now in any way, that there really is a lot of us that want to help support and have had a lot of experience, and we're here for you.
I just want to say thank you, and that message that you just said of you guys being available to help has been definitely communicated over the course of the morning, and I feel much more confident going into next school year, knowing that there are resources and places I can look to ask questions, even if it's just, I mean, whether it's my outgoing board or you. So thank you for being there and for communicating that, and this training was super duper helpful, so thank you very much.
That's great to hear. Thank you.
And Hazen, you've got Rachel and I as in-house resources at Roosevelt.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna end the recording here.